on the promise of justice and deliver on the promise of reform. Late last night, after a 4-day trial, my colleagues and I secured a unanimous jury verdict of guilty as charged on second-degree murder, attempt second-degree murder, and obstruction of justice. This was an incident that rocked the St. Roch neighborhood. The defendant laid in wait for the victim's vehicle and proceeded to turn that 1600 block into a war zone. I've got a message to the families and businesses of that 1600 block. This office and this jury heard the excruciating terror that you all lived through in those 911 calls, and we played them for the jury over and over again. To the mother, grandmother, and child of Tommy Wimberly, I know from Vicki just how scared you all were throughout this entire ordeal. You were too scared to even come to court to face your loved one's killer. And that is a tragedy. We should not live in a community where the people of our neighborhoods don't even feel safe in the halls of justice to see justice administered. Justice was served. The man that took Tommy away from all of you was convicted by a unanimous jury. Now, I know that does not bring him back. And I pray that you and this entire neighborhood can at least start to begin to heal. As I quoted Judge Afric, I think it was on Monday, before I went in to start trying this case with Joe and Corbin, I'll quote him again. There are no winners and losers in the criminal legal system. They are just resolutions. They can be just or they can be unjust. And this office is committed to just and fair resolutions. A lot of people were outside on that block when gunfire was unleashed, hitting cars, houses, businesses, and as we know, people. The car that the victims were driving went out of control and pinned a young woman under it, and she had to be hospitalized. Despite the number of people who were out there on that scene that we could see in videos and still shots, only one of them was in court to testify. That is what we have to address in the city of New Orleans. This entire community, this entire city, is in fact in dire straits as it relates to violent crime. But we need all of us participating and cooperating to truly make us safe. So I am imploring every single person in this community to work with this DA's office, to work with our victim witness advocates, to give us a chance to bring you closure and bring you justice. We can't do it without witnesses, and we can't do it without victims coming forward to cooperate and tell what they went through. So I implore you to trust us. I want to thank our Victim Witness Advocates Division, our Chief, Allison Morgado, but a special thanks to Vicki Landry on my right. Vicki worked with this family, consoled and counseled this family that was absolutely devastated by what happened to their son. You brought him through it, Vicki, and I thank you for it. I thank you for sharing the text messages from his mother about what happened in court. I especially thank you for giving her the blow-by-blow about what was happening in court because she was just too terrified to be there in person. As I promised in the 7-pronged plan to combat violence in the city of New Orleans that we presented to the City Council back in January, We are using the firearm sentencing provision of the criminal code. That's Article 893.1. And we invoked that last night because there are simply too many guns on our street. This jury got to see a young man order up an assault rifle and get it delivered faster than Domino's Pizza. That's a problem. There are too many guns on our streets, and we will use the firearm sentencing provision in every way that we can to reduce the number of guns on our street, to make people fearful of using guns illegally. Behind me, you see an incredible team. And I had the privilege of coming from my own trial that Friday and starting a trial with these guys, Joe Zanetti and Corbin Bates. Thank you for letting me tag along and work with you to deliver justice to these families. You all put together a simply amazing case. This was not an easy case, Corbin and Joe. You know the challenges we were up against, and it could have easily gone the other way, but because of your good, hard work on the facts and the evidence, we were able to get guilty as charged on all counts. And because of you, Vicki, we were able to get the family the justice they deserve, because it's not just enough to get the right resolution, but it's also about how that family feels throughout this entire process, and you delivered on that. These are among some of the finest public servants you will see in the city of New Orleans. Assistant DA Joe Zanetti, Assistant DA Corbin Bates, First Assistant Ned McGowan, and more importantly, victim witness advocate Vicki Landry, because she is advocating for the victims and survivors of violent crime in this city. Thank you for your work. If you see them on the street, please pat them on the back. I am not paying them enough for what they do. And I want to reiterate, this was not some sort of slam dunk, open and shut case. This was two very violent felonies that wreaked havoc on our community. And, you know, it's important to say that while I was on leave for 2 weeks, the work of this office continued to move forward. In the 2 weeks that I was on leave and I was on Camp Street, during those 2 weeks, this DA's office tried 5 violent felony cases in front of jurors, secured 4 convictions, including 2 very tough cases involving sexual abuse of a minor. And so since March, since we have been allowed to ply our trade at Tulane and Broad and have jury trials, we've tried almost 40 cases in front of juries. I've tried a number of those personally with my ADAs myself, and I will continue to do that. This compares to just over 50 cases tried in 2018, all of 2018. We've tried 40 since March, only 50 were tried in 2018, and under 50 tried in 2019. I think that's worth mentioning, because you need to understand the work that these young lawyers and advocates are doing for very little pay. And it's also worth mentioning that this office, for the very first time, has to try these cases and get unanimous verdicts, because that is the right thing to do. We're fighting vigorously for the people of this city. We will continue to do that, but we will do it in a fair and just way, so that victims and survivors don't hear 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that verdict is being overturned by an appellate court because a DA did not do it fair and justly. This office is going to do it right, it's going to do it hard, but it's going to do it fair. I'll take your questions.
We'll take some on-topic questions.
You talk about, challenges for your office moving forward, especially like the lack of cooperation with witnesses and victims. Domestic violence cases, some of the numbers, 106 cases closed, 34% of those were dismissed, and 5 of them were guilty as charged. Please. What do you think about those numbers? Are you satisfied with that? And how do you make those numbers better?
So, Natasha, it's a great question. Domestic violence cases are some of the most difficult cases we'll get. And that's not because of the difference in the job that the DA's office is doing or that the victim witness advocates are doing. It's because they're tough nationally, because you have victim and perpetrator living in the same home without the financial resources to get out and get a second household. You have victim and perpetrator sharing the same bank account and credit card, sometimes sharing the same car with kids, right? So oftentimes, the lion's share of the times you have the person who called the police, the person who was injured and hurt, being the very same person who's coming to this office to say, I don't want to go forward. And it's tough. And so we're working creatively with Eva Lessinger, who's starting a new organization to deal with working with batterers intervention. We're still working very closely with Mary Claire and her beautiful team at the Family Justice Center to make sure that we're getting involved in these domestic violence cases sooner so that we can provide tools to victims and hopefully at some point provide tools for the people who find themselves committing these crimes so that they don't reoffend. These cases are tough. We're not going to give up because they're tough. The numbers are abysmal and have been abysmal for a very long time. But I do believe that with the right coordinated and strategic work, we can address domestic violence. And if we can bring down interpersonal violence in our homes, we will reduce violence in our streets. Because a lot of times we talk about the victim and the perpetrator, but there's little kids, there's teenagers who are in that home who see that violence. And regardless of whether it is a guilty plea, a conviction by trial, or a person goes through some other intervention to deal with that violence, that child still sees it. And the data is very clear that young people who grow up in homes where people hit people tend to see violence very differently and tend to get caught up in that same cycle.
Jillian?
Yeah, you know, it's when you've got a victim's family that will come to this office but won't cross the street to go to court because they feel terrorized by what that individual did, not just to their family member, but the other passenger that was shot in the car and the other woman who was pinned under that car. Those witnesses saw a cache of weapons delivered in broad daylight to this perpetrator. And that is terrorizing. And so I understand that they don't want to put themselves and their families in harm's way. But Joe Zanetti did, Corbin Bates did, and this jury did. Some of the members of the jury were in tears coming back with this verdict. We've got a lot of work to do. But New Orleans is too important, it's too beautiful for us to give up. And so I'm going to keep asking for more resources from City Hall so that we can get more victim witness advocates so Vicki can have some help, so Allison Morgado can have some help. You know, we've got more victims and survivors and witnesses than we have time in a day. So we've got to put more resources there. We keep talking about the resources for the NOPD, and they need them. Believe me, the NOPD needs every bit of resource they can get. But if we're putting resources into making arrests, we've got to make sure that we're putting resources into obtaining the convictions from those same arrests. And we also have to understand that just because a person isn't shot on the street, if they witness that, they're traumatized too. And so we need, whether it's the cities, mental health department, whether it's schools and school leaders. We need to make sure that we are dealing with trauma on every single level because the DA's office can only do so much. But if we start addressing it on a citywide level, I think we can bring some healing and some comfort to people that will make them feel that they can play a role in prosecuting these cases and feel that comfort.
I just have, when is the sentencing date and what is the defendant facing?
There's a mandatory life sentence for second-degree murder, and that's a heavy sentence, and I know the jury was thinking about that. It's really hard to get a conviction for second-degree murder, given that a person will die in Angola and be carried out in a pine box. But it's not okay to settle your differences with AK-47s on city streets, and people need to know that, and people need to know that there will be a serious cost for that.
Any follow-up, gentlemen? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to be back. Thank you. Keep it up.